Chapter 2. Rabbits and Reindeer. Narrow beams of light filtered in through the gaps in the ceiling, casting beams of light throughout the dusty house. Katy sat at a small, rickety table, looking up at the patchwork of vines and branches, whilst Kyle stood waiting patiently with Max at his side. Suddenly Blitzen returned. He was being followed by a beautiful female with red cheeks, and behind the two of them were 3 small deer, anxiously following in their parents' shadows. Vixen quickly introduced herself before the 3 young deer blurred and then morphed into the form of children, 2 girls and a young boy. All of the children had dark hair which trailed after them as they scurried around the house playfully now. Vixen managed to calm her 3 children before setting the table and getting dinner ready. Finally, the 7 of them, as well as Max, were sitting around the table. Blitzen passed around a bowl of leaves, wild grasses, berries, and nuts. As the family sat and ate, they talked about the endless rolling plains around them and to the west. They talked about the forests around them, the creatures and animals which inhabited them, and the dangers hidden within. Blitzen went on to mention that the seat of power in Avalon was known as Crown Caldera, and that the king of these lands ruled from there. "But where are we?" Kyle finally asked. "That's a peculiar question to ask," replied one of the children. "In my world, deers don't turn into people and talk," Katy said. "In your world?" Vixen asked. "Yes, we chased our dog, Max, through a large tunnel under an upturned tree, but now I'm not really sure if we are in our world, let alone if we know our way back," Kyle told them. "In which case you are human children from Earth," Blitzen told them. "That makes you Terrans," he informed them. "Children and Max, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the lands that we call Avalon, one of the greatest islands on the allurement sphere," Blitzen told them. "If you're really from Earth, then you will be the first humans to have set foot here in a very, very long time," he continued. "Not since the very beginning," Vixen added. The twins both smiled at one another. "Really?" they said in unison. "Only Ilario remembers now. He is the eldest of our people and king in this realm," Vixen told them. "Is Ilario a deer as well, then?" Kyle asked. "No, child," Blitzen replied, shaking his head and smiling. "Ilario and his line have ruled, one before the other, since the beginning of time," Vixen told them. When Kyle still looked confused, one of the children said, "He's a lion, and a scary one at that," the young deer said, pulling a scary face. "Only the king will be able to help you get back to your world," Blitzen informed them. "Your timing couldn't have been any better, though. You've arrived in autumn. At this time of the year, there's a truce between the animals and a large feast is planned at Crown Caldera," he continued. "It's getting late today, though. We shall travel tomorrow," Vixen said. "I shall send word to the king right away," Blitzen said, before scurrying out of the house. "Vixen, you said that the king was your kind, but how can he be when he's a lion?" Katy asked. Vixen smiled. "I did, didn't I?" she said. "You are correct, the king is a lion, but we have our anima and animus forms, which you would call our human form," she told them. "The highest born and alphas of each species and their families are the only ones with access to this gift. The others are still wild," she told them. Once they had finished, she shooed the children to their beds. "Please make yourself comfortable. Blitzen will be back soon, and the morning shall be soon after that. Find your rest easy, children, and worry not," Vixen said, before retiring to her own bed. Katy and Kyle sat talking for some time before Blitzen finally returned. He sat with them for a while longer, talking in the darkness. Finally, he stood, smiling at them before patting each of his own children on the head, followed by Katy and Kyle. Then he said a quick night to Max before he returned to Vixen's side. The twins were woken early the next morning. Blitzen had readied his children, whilst Vixen prepared breakfast for them and Max. After quickly eating, the group was soon standing outside the small house in the trees, looking into the shadowy forest before them. A tall white bird was perched in one of the trees at the edge of the forest, watching the group as they readied themselves. Blitzen signalled to the bird, and then it took off over the treetops, disappearing into the fog and mist that had rolled in from the mountains to the east. Blitzen set off first, leading the way along a twisting path made of small white stones. The edges of the path were lined with larger black volcanic stones. The path wound its way between the willows, oaks and pines, around bushes covered in flowers and some covered in thorns. The sun shone through in patches, bathing the ground in pools of gold. In these glades, colour could be seen everywhere, though the wildflowers bloomed. Mushrooms and other fungi that clung to every damp, rotting surface in the darkness glowed with their own luminescence. As Katie and Kyle followed Blitzen, the fawns danced around them playfully. Vixen chased them on joyfully, whilst Max joined in, barking and playing with them whilst they travelled. Birds were chattering in the treetops as Blitzen began to explain where they were heading. We must find Peter Rabbit and his mate Cottontail first. They should be nearly ready to go to Crown Caldera themselves, he said, smiling. Peter and Cottontail will be happy to see us, he said. It's been a long time, Vixen added. We don't always go to the yearly feasts, you see, she told them. After a few hours, all of the children were complaining. Vixen calmed them as Blitzen informed them that they were almost at the right clearing. Meandering around the last few trees, the group entered a large glade with a large old stump at the centre. It was similar to some of the other large tree stumps in the middle of them, except this one was different somehow. Blitzen and Vixen didn't stop at the edge of the glade, continuing towards a large wooden mansion that had been built up against the tree stump for support. The house was beautifully crafted from spruce, which had been cut from around the glade. The mansion was 3 stories high, and the top windows looked out over the top of the stump in all directions. Blitzen walked up the 2 steps onto the porch and knocked on the door. Vixen waited at the bottom as she mothered her children and the twins. The large door swung inwards, and a couple of large rabbits appeared in the doorway, smiling at them. Kyle grabbed Max and held him in his arms before the dog could charge for the 2 giant rabbits. Peter, Cottontail, Blitzen said, greeting his old friends. How are you both? He asked. We're very well, Peter replied. It's been a long time, Blitzen, Cottontail said, smiling before she turned to greet Vixen. What brings you to our home? Cottontail asked. Blitzen turned and pointed down towards Katie and Kyle. 2 human children showed up yesterday, he told them. We're heading towards Crown Caldera to see the king, he replied. We thought it would be a good idea to stop in on the way, Vixen added. Peter nodded and then stepped aside, allowing the family of deer to enter, as well as the human children. Cottontail showed the children to their rooms and then led them back down to the kitchen where Peter had begun to cook for them. Blitzen and Vixen were already sitting at the table, and as their little ones scurried to sit beside them, Cottontail pointed towards 2 seats for Kyle and Katie. Cottontail set the table and seated herself as Peter brought over grilled lettuce, carrots, bracken, seeds, nuts, berries, and buttercups, all mixed in with straw. Sitting at the head of the table, Peter smiled at everyone. Dig in, he said, before filling his cheeks with grain and stuffing in another handful of lettuce. Everyone else around the table was silent, except for the sound of chewing. Kyle looked at his sister as she ate a lettuce leaf. Where's the proper food? Kyle asked. Proper food? Proper... How dare you? Peter shouted, getting to his feet, enraged by the comment. Blitzen and Vixen both stood. Calm, Peter. They're human children. They're not from these lands and they don't know our customs, Blitzen said, calming the rabbit. We should introduce ourselves properly, Katie said. My name is Katie, and this is my brother Kyle, she said, pointing at Kyle, who still sat with an empty plate. Blitzen walked around the table whilst he morphed his antlers back into view, looking to his mate as she did the same. We are from here, Peter, Cottontail, he said to their hosts. We must not forget our manners either, Blitzen told them. Peter sat back down before he and Cottontail morphed their large rabbit ears back into view. I'm sorry, children. We didn't know how little you knew about our world, Cottontail said calmly. The large group spent the next few hours sitting around a large table chatting, being introduced to the animals, people and customs of Avalon. Peter eventually brought dessert to the table, and Kyle finally began to eat something. Blitzen and Vixen recounted how they had met with the children and why they were heading towards Crown Caldera. As you know, only the king has the power to permit people into or out of these lands, Blitzen said. We must take them to him, he said. He will know why they are here and how to help them get back to their world, Vixen told the rabbit couple. Very well, Peter said, taking a swig from his goblet. You shall spend the night here, and in the morning we shall all leave for Crown Caldera, he told them. We might even meet with a few of the others on the way, Peter said, laughing. What do you say, Blitzen? Peter asked his friend. Without a doubt, Blitzen replied. I've already told Idris to warn the king of our arrival, Blitzen told him. Then he will bring his family and meet us at Barry's place, he said. Raising his goblet, Peter said good night to his guests and then stood. Cottontail, Blitzen and Vixen all stood, raising their goblets as well, toasting to one another's health. Then the adults carried their children upstairs and towards their beds. Do you have any children? Katie asked sleepily whilst Cottontail carried her. Yes, Cottontail replied. Peter and I have raised many children, she said, smiling, laying her in a plush warm bed of hay and reeds. Too many to count, Peter added. Yet hopefully there will be more, Peter said, putting Kyle to rest, before covering them all with downy blankets.